in German, there's a saying, wenn nicht jetzt, wann dann? If not now, then when? Germany stands for global climate justice. We stand for solidarity with the countries and population groups particularly impacted by the climate crisis. We need everyone for the necessary change. Civil society and social movements, scientists, companies and trade unions, indigenous peoples, young people, women and girls, and many others. Let's move forward together.
Hello, and welcome to Washington Post Live. I'm Michael Birnbaum, a climate reporter at the Post and a former Berlin bureau chief. Today we're taking a look at European climate policy. Our guest today is Jennifer Morgan, Germany's special envoy for climate. Jennifer, hello.
Hello.
Just to start, are you cold right now in your office? I know that Germany is limiting heat in government offices. How does it feel in Berlin?
It's very cold in Berlin right now, and indeed our offices are set at 19 degrees Celsius, so it's a bit chilly, but I've got a sweater, and in comparison to what's happening in the Ukraine right now, I think we're doing very well.
So 19 degrees Celsius for our American audience, that's about 66 degrees Fahrenheit, which here in Washington, typically we only allow that with air conditioning in the summertime, not in the winter. So before you were Germany's climate envoy, you ran Greenpeace International for 6 years. Why did you make the switch from activism and advocacy to governing?
Well, I had the opportunity when Minister Baerbock, the foreign minister, gave me a call to ask if I would be interested in serving, and I made the switch because I read the coalition agreement for this government, and it had the goals that I have stood for and worked for many years. The 1.5 degrees goal, ambitious national climate policies, phasing out of coal, a greenhouse gas neutrality goal by 2045, and also a foreign policy that was really values-based and where climate and even climate justice was in the center. And I thought, okay, I always have tried in my life to go where I thought I could make change. And this was an amazing honor and opportunity that I thought, I should give a go. And we always say in the NGO movement that one should move beyond one's comfort zone at this moment of crisis. And that's what I did, and I'm really glad that I did.
There's a lot of ground to cover. I'm looking forward to talking about a lot of those issues with you today. But just to begin, I covered the Glasgow talks, the UN climate talks in Glasgow last year. I saw you leading protests there. This year, you were leading Germany's negotiations at the latest installment of those UN climate talks in Egypt. What do you wish 2021 Jennifer Morgan had known about actually being in government and being in a position of responsibility in these climate negotiations?
I mean, I guess one thing is just how challenging it is to have a responsibility to make decisions, to have to balance out the different priorities of different countries. Certainly in the loss and damage negotiations, that was certainly a key piece. And, I guess I always had respect for negotiators and people, ministers who were there, but I don't think I understood the the extra responsibility that's on the shoulders of people who are trying to come to decisions and to agreements. And that's an additional level, I think, that I now appreciate more.
And you took your current position just weeks before Russia invaded Ukraine, sparking an energy crisis and a clear humanitarian crisis. How has the war in Ukraine affected your mission now?
Well, I think the horrific war, Russian war of aggression, certainly it has impacted it. I think it's done so in different ways. I think it's made the urgency of phasing out fossil fuels and going for renewable energy, which is now been termed freedom energy in Germany, as a top priority. And I think accelerated the pace at which we've been passing legislation, setting new ambitious goals to scale that up in Germany and in Europe. I think it's also really put an extra emphasis on our work with developing countries. After, when we see what this Russian war is doing in terms of the pressure on food security and on energy security, and after COVID, I think the sense of solidarity that we feel is even greater. And those two things, I think, have been common themes. That means we're really looking for those new alliances, putting a even bigger focus on making sure that we maintain internationally binding rules, an international set of rules that all countries should be following. That's obviously a key priority for me and for us.
So with the war in Ukraine, there's a short-term crisis and there's long-term work. What do you think are going to be the lasting consequences of the war for Europe's climate policy?
Well, I think due to the Russian war, I think Europe is moving faster. I mean, I think the geopolitics of energy are shifting dramatically, I think, for Europe, and therefore, as we will peak, I'm pretty sure we will peak gas earlier. We're, having, by the end of the year, we will have phased out our Russian imports. 55% of our gas imports came from Russia. And I think now, looking at how we within Europe, first of all, meet our energy needs, and then also looking and accelerating the pace of new energy and climate partnerships around the world. I think that is a very big shift. I also think that we've learned the hard way that being dependent on one nation for so much of something that brings, services and stability to our citizens is a mistake that we shouldn't make again. And I think, Europe also is holding together on that. I think lastly, in a way, the Russian war has brought Europe closer together in how have been working together. Also, the G7, I think, in a way, has had a revitalization. I'm sure that was not Putin's plan, but certainly standing closely together to forge a way forward that has climate protection, energy, security, and peace more centrally there as key goals.
And you were, of course, at those recent UN climate talks in Egypt. You helped engineer that last-minute deal and damage, a kind of climate reparations. It really the first action on that at one of these gatherings. Take us a little bit behind the scenes at the negotiations. What was it like?
Well, it was intense because the first thing that the Egyptian presidency asked myself and Maisa Rojas, the environment minister from Chile, if we would be co-facilitators for those loss and damage negotiations. They asked us that at the pre-COP, which was 3-4 weeks before the COP, because the first thing that we had to do was actually see if we could get that issue on the agenda in a way that was acceptable to all parties, which was a huge disagreement at the Bonn talks in June. And so what we did was we listened. I just have to say, we listened a huge amount in the lead up to the COP in order to put forward something for the presidency that could then get the issue even on the agenda, which was very clear by the way that it's not about liability, it's not about reparations for the past, it's about looking forward, but it is about addressing loss and damage. And then, as we arrived, the first week, actually, the negotiations were undertaken by Minister Rojas and my team. And then when she arrived, we had a series of bilaterals with all major groups. So if you can imagine, the UN has various groups. When we met with the G77 in China, that's all the developing countries. Pakistan was the chair. So we would meet and listen to a group of, it was like 45 people. And then we would sit and we would meet with the European Union separately. And then we would meet and listen to what's called the Umbrella Group, which is a group that has the United States and Canada and Japan. And then we would meet with the Arab group or the others. So we really did a lot of listening, and then based on that, we worked with the Secretariat. The Climate Secretariat supported us to put together a draft text, and then we consulted further. So it was a lot of listening, synthesizing, trying to really understand the priorities of each of those key blocks, so that we could put forward something to the Egyptian presidency that could actually come to a decision. And that was indeed touch and go until, I would say, final hours. And there, I have to say, I think the European Union played a very important role in getting a breakthrough.
One area that didn't make as much headway was efforts to accelerate cuts to global greenhouse gas emissions. The US got some of the blame for that. Is that fair? And why wasn't there more progress on emissions?
Indeed, we've stated very clearly that this outcome was far from enough on mitigation. We are still on a pathway, as the Secretary General said, a climate, highway to hell, I think was his quote. Yes, and I think, in some ways you can say, okay, we held the line from Glasgow because the 1.5 degree goal is still the goal, but there was not progress. And I think what we saw actually was that there was a group of particularly oil and fossil fuel dependent countries that didn't want to go in that direction. There were over 80 countries that supported a phase out of fossil fuels, the European Union, Germany being in there. Alliance of Small Island Nations, the Colombia, Chile, the progressive Latin American countries. But it was pretty clear that those other oil-producing, gas-producing countries did not want to go in that direction. And frankly, we had to consider at the end, which Vice President Timmermans from the European Union talked about, whether we were going to say no to the entire agreement because there was not enough there for mitigation, but then we would have lost the loss and damage outcome, and we didn't want to do that. So we moved forward and are doubling down. A week later went to South America to be forging new alliances because we have no time to lose.
We have a question from our audience. Max Grönig of Washington, D.C. asks, what is the strategy to ensure at COP28 and COP29 we meet expectations on ambition and loss and damage? Is there a recognition that a different approach is required?
I think on loss and damage, if I have to think about what made it a success at this COP, I think there were a mixture of things. And that's what we need for COP28 and COP29, which have very important issues on the agenda, whether it be that fossil fuel phase out or whether it be this global stock take, which should be a science-based process to inform the next set of targets. We need to increase our current targets. Part of that was really having the most vulnerable countries have a driving role in these negotiations. The other was civil society. The pressure that was coming in from around the world from every group was very important and was felt, I think. And the fact that the impacts were hitting so hard that one just couldn't look away anymore. I think those pieces are key. And then really, in the end, we had a strong coalition in this past COP for an outcome on loss and damage. We need to do that for COP28 and COP29. I think the other piece I would say, which maybe was not as much seen, but for me, the COPs are always the multilateral negotiations, but they're also the agreements that get struck bilaterally or plurilaterally. And I think we need to do more of that. Maybe that's a bit of a different model, what the questioner is asking, where we, came to an agreement with South Africa for an investment plan for them to phase out coal more quickly. We came to an agreement with Indonesia for the same and phasing up renewable energy. Germany's working with Kenya to help it meet its 2030 100% renewables goal. I think those types of initiatives, and the UAE is clearly trying to position itself in that type of space despite its gas production capacity, then I think we need to really focus in there to be building the real economy. I mean, it's clear that renewables is more affordable. It's clear that it's so much better than others. It's clear that a sustainable bioeconomy is better for people. And we need to connect those local, national, and international debates better.
Here in the United States, President Biden has invested an unprecedented amount of money in combating climate change through the Inflation Reduction Act. One area that's received a lot of attention, a big part of that act, is a tax break for electric vehicles that are made in the United States. What do you think that means for Europe's EV industry? Are you worried about kind of a Buy American approach?
Well, I mean, I think first of all, we welcome the fact that there was legislation passed in the United States that the Biden administration, the U.S. President Biden succeeded in that. And it's clear that the U.S. wants to be a global leader in energy transformation. And that's a very important signal for the world, because I think the markets of the future are going to be green. And I think that will move forward from this renewable energy, electric vehicles kind of a transformation. I think we're keen as Germany and the EU to work with President Biden and also to operationalize that promise to make that Inflation Reduction Act also work for partners. I think we're in very many conversations also with other countries. And I think we want to make that a race to the top that's fair. And I think we're confident that we can do that in a transatlantic kind of partnership. We have already something with Germany and the US, and also the European Union works closely to set those standards. In fact, just yesterday, the G7 under Germany's leadership concluded the Climate Club, which is there to drive industrial sectors, energy intensive sectors, towards the 1.5 limit, so that we can achieve those reductions in a way that we can all have, share from those successes.
We have another question from our audience. Travis Brubaker from DC asks, will the IRA help or hinder transatlantic efforts to curb climate change and accelerate Germany's Energiewende? How does Germany view the idea of a potential Buy European Act?
Well, I think, as I said, it's a big priority for us, and I think we're working closely with the United States to come to an agreement. But at the same time, we have to continue our own efforts to strengthen the European green transition of our industries. And we are having conversations in Germany and in the European Union how we can do that best. I think we're seeing that when we act together, we are strong. We have also tremendous renewable resources across the European Union. And I think that's really the focus of testing that. I think we are sticking with our ambitious goals and driving those forward. But we also want to make sure that for our companies, that it's fair and that there's those conditions for that race to the future, which we need to have in just a couple of years here. So I think that's how we're thinking about it, that kind of a balance moving forward.
And in Brussels just this morning, I think in the early hours of today, the European Parliament and the European Council made a lot of progress on a European carbon border tax. Don't want to get too deep into the weeds here, but that would basically help ensure that emissions that are from things that are produced outside of the European Union aren't unfairly imported into the EU at a savings compared to the more expensive things in the European Union that are more expensive because they're being manufactured in a more green manner. What do you think that means for Europe's climate policy? Are you optimistic that that will help Europe's climate ambitions?
Well, I am optimistic. I think both for Europe, but also really globally. I mean, that mechanism is really there to also create incentives for other countries to green their supply chains. We are in the middle of a climate crisis, and we all need to be moving together on that. And so the CBAM, as it's noted, is really there to incentivize for other countries to put in place the types of policies that will decarbonize their supply chains, so that we can be decarbonizing the economy to meet that 2050 zero carbon economy goal. And I think that is the purpose of it. I think what I have seen already, even before the agreement, was that that's been taken seriously. It's almost as if Europe is now being taken as that we mean this climate action seriously. It remains a top priority of the Union, of Germany's leadership. So I think we're hoping others will join in, and this is an extra mechanism. You know, the Paris Agreement doesn't have enforcement mechanisms in it, and I think this is an extra way of creating those incentives so that countries move in the right direction.
And Germany recently announced about 200 million euros in subsidies to help its citizens and businesses cope with high energy prices. That's a Germany-specific approach. It has objected to some of the efforts to put really ambitious low limits on the prices of natural gas to combat high energy prices around Europe. Some of Germany's neighbors have criticized it for having what they say is a go-it-alone approach, kind of prioritizing Germans over others. Is that fair? And what do you say to those critics?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that Germany is working very actively and engaged within the European Union to find solutions that work for everyone, and that is a current topic, and it will come today and in the coming days to see how we can do that. I think the way that we approach the European Union, the role that we play there is fundamental, while at the same time being very close and having very large impacts that came from this Russian war and phasing out Russian fossil fuels, and therefore wanting to make sure that we can be taking care of our citizens, our small businesses that have seen a huge jump in energy prices in a way that I think we needed to ensure that we had stability here, and that stability also brings stability for Europe. So it's very interdependent, and I think we are working hard, like I said, within Europe for those types of solutions. And I think a strong Germany is also a condition for a strong Europe, and we're working on both in parallel.
How much of your time is spent on those kinds of long-term efforts to help Germany reduce its ambitions, help Europe reduce its ambitions, and how much is spent on that short-term energy crunch? There simply isn't enough energy right now in Europe for all of its citizens, all of its needs. Some of that short-term energy is spent on finding fossil fuels to fill the gaps. How do you find the balance, and what is the balance right now?
Well, I think for the government as a whole, because we have a kind of an approach where climate change has been mainstreamed across this German government. So we have an economics and climate action ministry, along with my leading of the foreign policy, climate foreign policy out of the Federal Foreign Office. And so I think obviously it is a top priority for our economics and climate ministry, and I support in that, and our chancellery, of course, as well, to make sure that we have a replacement. And I think that's the key thing to note, a replacement for that Russian gas, and to do it in a way across the government, really, that doesn't endanger our climate goals, our long-term climate goals. We have a binding 2045 climate greenhouse gas neutral target. And therefore, the ways that we're doing that, the ways that the Economics and Climate Ministry are working on implementing that, are those, whether they be floating LNG terminals or looking to make sure from partners that we can fill that gap while we're scaling up renewable energy and energy efficiency. Germany passed the largest legislative package on energy, and one could even say almost on anything, this March, to scale up our renewables 80% by 2030 and energy efficiency, and to accelerate the pace of implementation. I think my role there is to be bringing in the international perspective, to be working with allies, to also be looking at how we can fill the gaps medium term, also with green hydrogen in a socially safe and equitable and environmentally sound way. And the Economics and Climate Ministry is really in the lead of our national implementation and making sure we get that balance right, climate goals in place, coal phase out in place, but making sure that we have heat for our citizens for this winter and next.
Well, as you said, there's already a lot happening in Germany right now in terms of efforts to reduce emissions. What more could the government be doing to help Germans in the middle of this crisis reduce their emissions and try to address their problems in a kind of green manner?
Well, I think the government can always be doing more in terms of advising citizens. Of course, it's their own decisions about how they can save energy. We're seeing actually a tremendous response to that from both companies and from citizens, and how they're responding and how their purchases can make a difference on that. I think we're looking also, there's lots there about how people can be getting and installing renewable heat pumps in their homes, just a whole range of measures, how they can also be reducing their own demand across the board, also in transportation. So I think that's a big piece. And then we're just really monitoring obviously the economic situation, and very much looking out as much as we can for people who have a lower income, where this is especially hitting them hard, and that's something that they can be doing both for themselves, but also in solidarity with Ukrainians. We have a lot of Ukrainian, especially women and children here in Germany. And so we feel their situation, not of course as directly as they do, but I think that's also a key thing maybe of that spirit to try and bring. That doesn't mean there isn't societal debate, but it's very close to home here.
And just one last question here. You've mentioned a couple of times Germany's plan to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. Is that an easy or an ambitious goal? What does it look like for Germany right now?
That's pretty ambitious. Germany, we produce steel, we have chemical companies, we have an energy intensive economy, we're a trade nation. So what it looks like is a climate law that is binding with sectoral goals across the different sectors, and then different ministries that are responsible for implementing those measures, with an independent commission that tells us where we're doing well and where we need to do more work. And I think we definitely are doing well, but we also need to do more work in our transportation sector, in our housing sector, because it is an all of society approach. I mean, we can, as government, be putting forward different laws, et cetera, but then, we want to do this together with our citizens, with local initiatives that can be having renewable energy, wind turbines coming in a way that is consistent with biodiversity and brings local benefits to those communities. And there's a lot of societal debate, and I think that requires a lot of listening, a lot of explaining in a way that isn't coming and telling people what to do, but trying to share where we are and what the dilemmas are, and also how they can be part of this solution. People here feel the climate crisis. They see it happening here in Germany and in Europe with the heat waves, with the dried out Rhine this summer, and many of them don't know what to do. And so I think a lot of it is that kind of partnership across society, where our companies play a big role sticking with their targets and also wanting to lead the way, by the way, on the green transformation internationally, whether it be green steel or whatever that product may be, but also really working with our families and with citizens so that they can be part of that, but also that they feel safe, and that we can do our part in supporting them in this transformation. It's hard, but it's absolutely essential. And I hope that the lessons that we're learning by having to do this in an accelerated pace can be useful. It's part of our climate foreign policy as well, to accelerate learning around the world, because it can't take 7 or 8 years everywhere to build a wind turbine. It needs to happen more quickly, but it needs to be done well.
Really complex issues. Unfortunately, we'll have to leave it there. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Jennifer Morgan. This has been really fascinating.
Well, thanks so much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for joining us, the audience. We're glad to have you. If you want to check out more of our upcoming events here on Washington Post Live, head over to our website. You can reach us at washingtonpostlive.com. There you can find all sorts of information about our upcoming events and conversations. Thank you again. I'm Michael Birnbaum. Really appreciate it, with Washington Post.